What if I told you that all your striving, all your desperate efforts to control life, are precisely what's keeping you from the very thing you seek? You see, we've been taught that achievement comes through force of will, through planning, controlling, and manipulating our circumstances. But here's the thing. The universe doesn't work that way. It never has. Think about it. The tighter you grip sand, the faster it escapes through your fingers. The more desperately you chase happiness, the more elusive it becomes. What if the greatest paradox of life is that surrender is actually the path to victory? That in releasing your white-knuckled grip on existence, you finally allow everything to fall perfectly into place. This paradox sits at the heart of our human experience. We resist letting go because we believe control equals safety. We cling because we fear the unknown. But have you ever considered that this very clinging might be the source of your suffering? That your desperate attempts to direct the river of life might be precisely what's causing you to drown? Why are we so afraid to let go? Perhaps because we've never been taught how. From our earliest days, we learn that success comes from effort, from pushing, from making things happen. We plan our careers, we schedule our days, we organize our lives down to the minute, and when things don't go according to plan, we feel that we've somehow failed. We believe at some fundamental level that if we could just try harder, think smarter, control more effectively, then everything would work out perfectly. But let me tell you something. There are three fundamental ways we grip life too tightly, and each creates the very problems we're trying to solve. First, there's mental control, our addiction to thinking, planning, and analyzing everything to death. Second, there's emotional control, our desperate attempt to feel only certain emotions while avoiding others. And third, there's spiritual control, our paradoxical effort to force ourselves into enlightenment or peace. You see, life naturally wants to flow, just as a river naturally finds its way to the ocean. When a river encounters an obstacle, it doesn't stop and analyze the situation. It doesn't form a committee to discuss possible solutions. It doesn't become angry or resentful at the boulder in its path. The river simply flows around. It follows the path of least resistance. It surrenders to gravity and terrain, and in that surrender, it inevitably reaches its destination. I once knew a man who built his entire identity around control. Every aspect of his life was meticulously planned and executed. His home was immaculate, his schedule precise, his career advancing exactly as he'd mapped it out. Yet inside, he felt empty, hollow. Despite achieving everything he thought he wanted, happiness eluded him. Success felt meaningless, connection impossible. Why? Because in controlling every variable, he'd eliminated all possibility for surprise, for growth, for life to show him something beyond his limited imagination. We do this. We all do this. We plan. We scheme. We manipulate. We convince ourselves that if we could just get everything and everyone to behave exactly as we want, then we'd finally be happy. Then we'd finally be safe. Then we'd finally be at peace. But peace doesn't come from controlling the world around you. It comes from releasing your grip on how you think things should be. The river flows. The river flows. The river flows. Not by force of will, but by surrendering to its nature. What if your life could flow with that same effortless power? What if, instead of exhausting yourself swimming upstream against the current, you could simply let go and be carried? Think about it. How much energy do you expend daily trying to control things that are fundamentally uncontrollable? How much suffering do you create by resisting what is? What might be possible if you released your grip, just slightly? on how you believe your life should unfold. Now, I'm not saying you should become passive or abandon all structure. But here's the thing. There's a profound difference between consciously participating in life and desperately trying to control it. Between making choices and making demands. Between flowing with purpose and damming the river of experience. What would happen if we explored these three forms of control that keep us trapped? If we examined how our mental, emotional, and spiritual grasping creates the very problems we're trying to solve? What might we discover about the true nature of freedom, of happiness, of peace? Retry now you will act as a professional scriptwriter. Based on the JSON script profile, you will write the story in parts. For each part, I will send you the description, then you write the story. You have to follow the pacing, language, emotional rhythm, wording, and pace specified in the script profile. Requirements. Do not include bullet points or chapter heads. Write only the script content. Each part has to be 1,000 word long. Don't use these punctuation marks. No quotes, dashes, parentheses, or other symbols. Part 2. The 3 traps. Maximum 500 words. Detailed description of Part 2. This section introduces the numbered framework that structures the script's core message. Begin with a clear announcement. The first trap of trying to be spiritual is, followed by a concise statement of the first trap, e.g., spiritual materialism, collecting practices and experiences like possessions. For each trap, follow a consistent pattern. 1. State the trap clearly with a memorable phrase. 2. Explain its mechanism using accessible but profound language. 3. Illustrate with a relatable example or anonymous anecdote. 4. Reveal the deeper irony or paradox within the trap. 5. Suggest how this trap perpetuates spiritual suffering. The 3 traps should build logically upon each other, with increasing philosophical depth. Potential traps to explore. Trap 1. Spiritual materialism, accumulating practices, experiences, knowledge. Trap 2. The spiritual ego, becoming identified with being spiritual. Trap 3. Separation from ordinary life, creating artificial distinction between spiritual and mundane. Use signature phrases like, you see, and, but here's the thing, to transition between ideas. Incorporate dry, observational humor sparingly to highlight the absurdity of these spiritual traps. The pacing should accelerate slightly during particularly passionate segments, describing the irony of each trap. Include rhetorical questions that prompt self-reflection. How many meditation cushions do you own? How many spiritual books line your shelves? And has any of it brought you what you're truly seeking? End this section with a transitional question that leads into the deeper exploration. So if these are the traps, what lies beyond them? What if we've been approaching spirituality entirely backward? Show more. Number 1. Mental control. The illusion that if we think enough, plan enough, analyze enough, we can somehow predict and direct the unfolding of our lives. You see, the mind is a magnificent tool, but a terrible master. We've come to worship thought as if it were reality itself, when in fact it's merely a limited representation, a map rather than the territory. Think about it. How often has your mind spun elaborate scenarios of what might go wrong, creating anxiety and suffering over events that never actually came to pass? Or how often have you planned the perfect conversation, only to find reality taking it in an entirely different direction? The mind seeks certainty in an uncertain world. It craves the comfort of knowing, of predicting, of controlling. But here's the thing. Life is fundamentally unpredictable. The universe is too complex, too interdependent, too vast for our limited minds to comprehend, let alone control. And yet we persist in this futile effort, believing that if we just think a little harder, plan a little more thoroughly, analyze a little more carefully, we can somehow master the unfolding of existence. I once knew a brilliant professor who lived entirely in his head. Every decision, no matter how small, required exhaustive analysis. Should he accept a dinner invitation? He'd need to weigh every possible outcome, consider every potential conversation, evaluate whether this would advance his goals. He was paralyzed by possibilities, trapped in an endless loop of thought. His life became smaller and smaller as his thinking expanded. The very tool he believed would give him mastery over life had become his prison. Have you noticed that your best ideas, your moments of genuine insight, rarely come when you're actively thinking? They arrive in the shower, on a walk, or just as you're falling asleep. This is no accident. When the controlling mind relaxes its grip, intuition can finally speak. When analysis steps aside, wisdom can emerge. The mind that constantly narrates, judges, categorizes, and controls is like muddy water, too stirred up to see through. Only when we allow it to settle does clarity emerge. We fear that if we stop controlling with our minds, everything will fall apart. But what if the opposite is true? What if when we stop imposing our limited conceptions on reality, life can finally show us its true nature, its inherent intelligence, its natural harmony? What if the universe knows what it's doing far better than our small, fearful minds ever could? Number 2. Emotional control. Our desperate attempt to feel only certain emotions while rejecting others. We want joy without sorrow, pleasure without pain, love without loss. We chase pleasant feelings and run from unpleasant ones. We build elaborate strategies to avoid vulnerability, discomfort, uncertainty. But life is not a menu from which we can select only our preferred experiences. Emotions flow like water. They are meant to move through us, not be dammed up or diverted. Yet how much energy do we expend trying to control what we feel? We numb with substances, distract with screens, rationalize with thoughts. We say, I shouldn't feel this way. I need to get over this. I need to be positive. But here's the thing. Resistance to emotion is what creates suffering, not the emotion itself. Number 1. Mental control, the tyranny of thought over being. Our minds, these magnificent instruments that have built civilizations and sent us to the stars, have become our masters rather than our servants. We believe that if we can just think clearly enough, plan thoroughly enough, analyze deeply enough, we can somehow outsmart uncertainty, control the future, ensure success, and avoid failure. But this is the great illusion. Have you noticed how your best ideas come when you're not thinking about the problem? That moment in the shower, on a walk, or just before sleep when inspiration suddenly appears? There's profound wisdom in this common experience. The mind that grasps cannot receive. The intellect that demands certainty becomes blind to possibility. You might ask yourself, why do I feel anxious when my plans are disrupted? Why does uncertainty feel so threatening? Because we've confused the map for the territory, the menu for the meal, the thought for reality itself. We've come to believe that our mental constructs, our expectations, our plans, our predictions somehow determine what is real or valuable. What if the most intelligent action isn't thinking more, but thinking less? Not abandoning reason, but creating space around it. Not drowning in thoughts, but watching them flow by like clouds in the sky. The paradox is exquisite. The mind that tries to control everything ends up controlling nothing, while the mind that lets go discovers an intelligence far greater than its own limited perspective. I once knew a businessman who planned his company's growth with meticulous precision. 5-year plans, market analyses, strategic projections, every variable accounted for. Yet his greatest success came from a chance encounter on an airplane, a conversation he could never have planned, leading to an opportunity he could never have predicted. The universe has far more imagination than our limited minds. Planning isn't the problem. Thought isn't the enemy. But here's the thing. When we grasp reality so tightly through our conceptual frameworks that we can no longer see what's actually happening, we've fallen into the trap of mental control. Life becomes rigid, possibilities narrow, and that spontaneous, creative intelligence that flows through all things can no longer reach us. Number 2. Emotional control. Perhaps even more insidious than mental control is our desperate attempt to manage, suppress, or manipulate our emotional lives. Feel this, not that. Express joy, but not anger. Be passionate, but not sad. We've created elaborate structures to avoid certain emotional states while clinging desperately to others. Emotions are like water. They're meant to flow, to move through us, delivering their intelligence, their energy, their wisdom. But we dam them up. We build walls against grief, channels around anger, barriers against fear. Yet the more we resist their natural movement, the more pressure builds behind our carefully constructed defenses. You see, emotion doesn't disappear when ignored. It doesn't dissolve when denied. It accumulates, intensifies, finds indirect expression. That persistent anxiety you can't explain, those physical symptoms with no medical cause, that inexplicable irritability or numbness, these are the voices of emotions denied their natural expression. I once knew a woman who prided herself on never crying. Strong, she called herself, rational, above the messiness of feeling. For decades, she maintained this rigid control until her body could bear it no longer. The dam broke during her mother's funeral, not with gentle tears, but with uncontrollable sobbing that lasted for days. Years of unexpressed grief flooding through at once, overwhelming in its intensity. What might have been a flowing stream became a devastating flood. Think about it. Have you ever noticed the relief that comes with finally allowing yourself to feel what you've been avoiding? The release when tears finally fall? The clarity after anger is honestly expressed? The peace that follows surrender to grief? This isn't coincidence. This is emotional intelligence completing its work in you. Now, I'm not saying we should indiscriminately express every feeling without discernment, but there's a profound difference between thoughtful emotional regulation and rigid emotional control. Between allowing emotions to move through us with awareness and damming them up until they stagnate or explode. What if emotions aren't problems to be solved, but messengers bringing essential information? What if sadness isn't weakness, but the heart's natural response to loss? What if anger isn't bad, but simply energy arising to protect what matters to you? What if fear isn't failure, but the body's wisdom alerting you to potential danger? The water flows. The water cleanses. The water nourishes, not by force, not by control, but by surrendering to its nature. Our emotional life can do the same, if only we stop trying to control the uncontrollable. As we explore these first two forms of control, mental and emotional, You might feel a growing tension, an awareness of how deeply these patterns run in your own life. Good. This awareness itself is the beginning of freedom. But there remains one more level of control to examine, perhaps the most subtle and the most profound. The spiritual control that keeps us seeking what we already are. Number 3. Spiritual control, the most subtle and perhaps the most profound form of grasping. Having recognized the limitations of controlling our external circumstances, we turn our controlling attention inward. We try to manipulate our consciousness itself. We strive for enlightenment, forcing ourselves toward awakening, turning spiritual practice into yet another achievement to attain, another goal to reach, another thing to control. Do you see the exquisite irony here? We're trying to control our way out of control. We're efforting our way toward effortlessness. We're using the very mechanisms of ego to transcend ego. It's like trying to smooth ripples on a pond by slapping at the water. Every attempt creates more of the very thing we're trying to eliminate. I once knew a spiritual seeker who spent 20 years in rigorous practice. Meditation retreats, sacred texts, renowned teachers. He accumulated knowledge, techniques, experiences. Yet the more he pursued awakening, the more it eluded him. His spiritual practice had become another form of achievement, another identity, another thing to grasp. Freedom remained theoretical, conceptual, always just around the corner. Until one day, exhausted by decades of seeking, he finally gave up, not in despair, but in complete surrender. And in that moment of total relinquishment, what he had been seeking revealed itself as what had been present all along. The very consciousness that was seeking was itself what was sought. Think about it. How can you become what you already are? How can you attain what is never absent? How can you reach a destination when there is nowhere to go? The spiritual search itself creates the illusion of separation from what we're seeking. Our very effort to control our spiritual unfoldment becomes the obstacle to its natural flowering. Let me tell you something. A tree in a storm does not resist the wind. It does not stiffen against the gale. It bends. It yields. It surrenders to forces greater than itself. And in that yielding lies its strength. The rigid tree breaks while the flexible tree remains. This is not weakness. This is not passivity. This is profound alignment with the fundamental nature of reality. You see, the universe is not a problem to be solved. Consciousness is not a state to be achieved. Life is not a project to be completed. When we approach our spiritual life as something to control, to direct, to achieve, we miss the essential truth that what we're seeking is not elsewhere. It's not in the future. It's not contingent on our effort. It's here, now, already complete, already perfect, already free. We meditate to get somewhere. We practice to become someone. We seek to find something, control, control, control. And all the while, what we're seeking is the very awareness in which all seeking occurs. It's like the eye trying to see itself, the hand trying to grasp itself, the ocean trying to find water. You are already what you seek. You always have been. This is the great paradox at the heart of all spiritual traditions. The path of mastery is the path of surrender. The way to freedom is the relinquishment of control. The door to enlightenment opens only when we stop trying to force it open. Not through passivity or indifference, but through a profound recognition of and alignment with what is already true. What if spiritual awakening isn't something you do, but something you allow? What if enlightenment isn't something you achieve, but something you recognize? What if the very consciousness reading these words right now is itself what all spiritual traditions have been pointing to? Not as a concept, not as a belief, but as the immediate non-conceptual awareness in which all experience arises. Can you feel the difference between striving toward awakening and simply noticing the awareness that is already present? Between controlling your spiritual journey and allowing it to unfold naturally? Between seeking what you lack and recognizing what you've never lost? This shift from control to surrender is not a technique. It's not another spiritual practice. It's a fundamental reorientation to reality itself. Now, I'm not saying spiritual practice has no value. Meditation, contemplation, study, these can all be beautiful expressions of our natural inclination toward truth. But when they become methods of control rather than invitations to surrender, they lead us further from rather than closer to what we seek. The truth is both utterly simple and profoundly challenging to our controlling minds. You cannot become what you already are. You cannot attain what is never absent. You cannot control your way to freedom from control. The very effort creates the problem it attempts to solve. The very seeking perpetuates the sense of lack it aims to fulfill. Let this sink in deeply. Not as another concept to grasp, but as an invitation to release the grasping itself. To let go of the controller. To surrender the seeker. To allow what is already present to reveal itself, not through your effort, but through your yielding. Now, how do we actually practice this art of letting go? How do we move from the intellectual understanding of surrender to its living reality? Not through more control, certainly, but through simple, direct practices that gradually loosen our grip on life. Start with your breath. Right now, as you listen to these words, become aware of your breathing. Not controlling it, not changing it, just noticing it. This simple act of attention, without intervention, is the essence of letting go. The breath breathes itself. It has been doing so since the moment you were born, without your conscious management. When you simply observe this natural process, you're practicing surrender in its most basic form. Next, extend this same quality of attention to your thoughts. Watch them arise, unfold, and dissolve, just as clouds form and disperse in the sky. Not pushing them away, not clinging to them, not identifying with them. Just noticing. This isn't about having no thoughts. It's about no longer being had by them. No longer believing that you are your thoughts or that your thoughts must control your experience. I once knew a man who spent decades trying to perfect his life. Career, relationships, health, spirituality, all of it meticulously managed according to his ideals of how things should be. Yet happiness eluded him. Peace remained theoretical. Until one day, during a profound personal crisis when all his carefully constructed controls failed him, he discovered something unexpected. In the very moment he stopped fighting reality, stopped demanding that life conform to his expectations, a deep peace emerged. Not because his circumstances improved, but because he no longer required them to be different. You see, letting go isn't about giving up or becoming passive. It's about recognizing where effort is useful and where it becomes an obstacle. It's about discerning between what you can influence and what you must accept. It's about aligning with reality rather than fighting against it. But what about my responsibilities, you might ask? My goals, my relationships, my commitments? Surely these require planning, effort, direction? Yes, but with a crucial difference. When action arises from acceptance rather than resistance, from clarity rather than fear, from response rather than reaction, it has an entirely different quality. It becomes effortless effort, directed but not controlling, purposeful but not rigid. Think about walking. You don't consciously control each muscle, calculate each step, manage each shift and balance. You simply intend to move, and the body naturally organizes itself around that intention. This is how all of life can unfold when we stop micromanaging reality. The great fear, of course, is that if we let go, everything will fall apart. Our lives will descend into chaos. We'll become irresponsible, ineffective, or taken advantage of. But here's the thing. This fear itself arises from the controlling mind, from the ego that believes without its constant vigilance, life cannot function properly. Yet life managed quite well before you learned to control it. The planets orbit, the seasons change, the heart beats, the body heals, all without your management. Remember the sand metaphor we began with? When you squeeze sand tightly in your fist, it escapes through your fingers. But when you open your palm, the sand rests there easily. This is how life works. The more tightly you grip it, the more it slips away from you. The more you surrender to what is, the more freely life can express itself through you. Let me tell you something. Surrender is not the absence of power. It is power perfectly aligned with the flow of existence. It is not giving up, but giving in to a wisdom greater than the controlling mind can comprehend. It is recognizing that you are not separate from the intelligence that grows forests, moves oceans, and spins galaxies. What if I told you that all your striving, all your desperate efforts to control life, are not only unnecessary, but actually obscure the perfect unfolding that is already occurring? That in your very attempt to direct the river, you've been fighting against your own deepest nature? That the happiness, peace, and fulfillment you seek have been present all along, simply waiting for you to stop obstructing them with your controlling mind? The paradox we began with now reveals its deeper truth. When you let go, everything does indeed fall into place. Not because letting go is a clever strategy to get what you want, but because letting go allows you to recognize what has never been absent. The harmony you seek is not something to create, but something to allow. The peace you desire is not something to achieve, but something to uncover. The wisdom you need is not something to acquire, but something to remember. Life flows. Life flows. Life flows. Not by force, not by control, but by surrendering to its true nature. And you are that life. When you release your grip on how things should be, you discover how they actually are. And in that discovery lies a freedom no amount of control could ever provide. So loosen your grip. Just a little. See what happens. Trust the unfolding. Not as a belief, but as an experiment. Let life show you what becomes possible when you stop trying to control the uncontrollable and start flowing with the river that has always been carrying you home.